Okay, so today I'm really excited about this one, reconnecting with a student, and this is Hannah Maruyama with Degree Free. How are you doing, Hannah?
I'm doing great, Mike. I am so excited to be here talking to you. It is full circle very much for my story to be on your podcast.
Awesome. Yeah, I heard about TikTok many years ago. I've heard Gary Vaynerchuk saying everyone needs to get on it, and I kind of dismissed it, as do many people, especially my age and beyond. And I started getting messages from students, and they were consistently saying that they heard about me from you, from Degree Free on TikTok. And so that led me down the path of looking you up and realizing that you were one of my former students, even though you're out there massively successful on TikTok and just astronomical numbers of views for your hashtags, et cetera. So I think to kind of introduce my audience to what you have going on, could you tell us about what you have going on right now? And then we can kind of rewind the clock from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, I am the face of the Degree Free TikTok account, and Degree Free is a movement that my husband Ryan and I started officially about 3 years ago. I think would be the first time we publicly used the the word. What's really exciting is in the past couple months, it has started to be used by Forbes and Business Insider. I even recently read it in a DoD report about cybersecurity. So it's pretty amazing to see something, to see a word that I coined, a term that I came up with being used to describe this movement, but this very steady down credentialing of jobs and the shifting of the economy towards merit, towards performance, and just seeing paper barriers be rolled away, and it's pretty awesome.
That's amazing. Yeah, so just going through that process of coining a phrase and now to the point where you have your own merch and wearing hats. I noticed your husband wearing a hat on your recent podcast. And I just recently discovered your podcast. It was TikTok and word of mouth from students that alerted me to you. I've appreciated your ability to communicate. And I think what rings true in your communication, which is your skills are off the charts, by the way, as far as just cutting through the noise and getting people's attention, but you're obviously passionate about the topics that you speak about. And so I'm sure this is something that was percolating for a while and probably some nervousness about approaching, I think you called it the educational industrial complex or something like that. So talk about that decision point or that inflection point of putting yourself out there and speaking your mind, knowing that you were going to receive some blowback, I'm sure.
That's a good question. No one's ever asked me that. Essentially, yes, it's I call it the academic industrial complex. Yes. And that's referring to the $848 billion endowments and the $1.7 trillion of debt that currently US citizens find themselves under. And taking on an industry that's that large, a lot of people don't realize the size of the college complex. They don't understand the function of it. They don't understand that a lot of colleges are functionally hedge funds where their entire purpose is to, and even if they're nonprofits, in quote, their entire function is to make as much money as possible, put it into their tax-free endowments, and then grow those investments. They are hedge funds. That's how they function. And so people don't understand their incentives. And because they don't understand their incentives, they just believe that all colleges are out for the greater good. And that's how we've gotten to trusting, not questioning, and not being skeptical of the motives and whether or not those motives align with our purchasing as consumers of their product. So, yeah, it was a pretty big Goliath to decide to throw rocks at. so, um, but what's been the coolest thing is as we've started to speak, people started to come out of the woodwork and say, "Oh, that's me. Oh, that's me." And these are people we've had pretty unbelievable guests on our podcast who have just come out of the woodwork. You know, the senior marketing manager for Dell North America, we've had engineering managers for Microsoft, we've had PMs for Meta that are making $500,000 a year. We've had engineers from Amazon, engineers from Twitch. They just come out of they come out of the woodwork to tell their stories and tell other people how they did what they did. So the amount of support in the movement is crazy because people can be part of the movement just by making their choices and self-educating. And that's something that I'm very passionate about. So my whole premise is that college is not education. Those words are not synonyms. They never have been. They never will be. Colleges don't own education. Education is something that anyone can attain. They can find it anywhere. And now, more than any other point in human history, it has never been so accessible. It has never been so at the fingertips of every single person in our country. And you're a great example of that because for me, at the time when I found your course, I didn't have money, I didn't have resources, I had no professional connections, my family doesn't come from money, and I was left going, okay, I was working at a call center, I was making $28,000 a year, and I wanted to retool into tech because I needed to make money to keep I was running a tattoo studio at the time, actually, and I needed to keep my studio alive because it was during COVID. And so that means that I had to pay to keep the doors of my business open, but I needed to find a skill that was high value enough that I could afford to do that, because businesses are very expensive hobbies, as you know. And so your course is a great example of that. A very specific education, a very targeted learning, a very concise quality information. And that is the future of education. It's going to be these very specific, very targeted, very pointed skills that people learn in their skill stack. And so that was, I hope that answered the question.
No, that's great. That's great. And I didn't realize that it was that recent for you. I had envisioned it maybe it was a few years earlier or something, just because of how far you've come in basically 3 years. So it sounds like you discovered my course around 2020 because you mentioned
Mhm.
COVID and lockdowns and all that. And I heard you talk about I guess, the cost of a college degree or purchasing a degree. And I think the thing that fascinates me about you and your husband is that you're creating this new language. And you were talking about this on episode 122 of your podcast, which is impressive because I've been, dabbling in the podcast game. And I don't even know how many episodes I have, but I don't think I've cracked 50, but I digress. But the point is that just kind of approaching this new language, not putting these concepts in a negative light, like, oh, I have some college or I'm not degreed or anything like that. And you also talking about their skills stack as well. And so um, I know that that's deliberate and really thoughtful of both of you. And I know that that's driven from needing to kind of overcome these objections. And so I want to talk about communication skills because, and this is kind of antithetical to my career, I've used my own communication skills to communicate technical concepts, but I really excel with telling people where to click and why and when. But how do you teach someone to communicate? And so, how have you and your husband developed your communication skills to this level?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, I've always been a talker. My husband is actually not so much of a talker, but I would argue, is the more thoughtful of the two of us, ironically enough. And that's why I think he really excels at interviewing folks on our podcast because he puts a lot of thought and a lot of prep into the questions that he asks. But I would say that he and I have been entrepreneurs for about 8 years, pretty much since we met, actually. And so I think that that has a lot to do with it, but communicating our ideas to each other and having to communicate with your spouse and then not only communicate with them, but convince them of a course of action that you're both going to be on. That's probably going to be very emotionally, financially, and energetically taxing in order to follow through with. So I think that that has a lot to do with it, actually. I would argue that the practice of communicating in marriage is really good. It's a
Mhm.
really good way to help you hone your communication skills. But ultimately, the answer for everybody is just volume because for every video that gets 500,000 views, I get one that got 4 and it was terrible. And if you look at early videos from our tattoo studio, oh my gosh. Sometimes I go back and I watch them just to remind myself how much I've learned because it was rough. It's rough. It's hard to watch them because you're so nervous and you're unsure of yourself. And even if you set up a camera and you're comfortable with one, it's you just psychoanalyze everything you do. It's crazy. But volume is the key. The
Okay.
more
Yeah.
practice you get, the better you get.
Yeah, you learn through that experience, and I've called that in the past making your own experience, and I think that's very invaluable. And so one thing I heard you talking about on I think a recent TikTok, and it kind of went viral, and you've had a lot of things go viral, so but and you characterized it as a rant, but you were breaking down the cost of a college degree and that approaching astronomical figures, and you brought up some points. Some of these I've thought about before, others I had not. And so, can you kind of share with this audience that choice or that decision, if you want to go the path of a college degree, what the true cost of that may be?
So part of what makes me so sure that when I speak about this, I'm right is because it's just a measured approach. It's all about mitigating risk. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with being a business owner and having to try things and taking calculated risks that usually have financial implications. But that's something that I've learned because I didn't grow up financially literate. I didn't grow up understanding business. I didn't grow up understanding, oh, if you do this, this is the financial cost to it. I didn't understand opportunity cost, any of that, and so that was something that I've been learning the past 7 years since I met my husband, since we've been on this entrepreneurial journey together, and one of the biggest things was realizing realizing that it's just taking a measured approach because right now the approach that we have to the college cost and to the college purchase is not measured. It's actually extremely irresponsible. I actually have a note here on my TikTok because to make a TikTok about this later, so you guys are going to get a sneak preview of this thought. We'll see how it goes. But I get a lot of people that will comment on my videos and say, well, my child's going to be a doctor, my child's going to be a neuroscientist, my child's going to be insert high level thing here. I get so many of those comments that it cannot possibly be true statistically because there's about 30,000 doctors a year in the US, and I get at least that many of those comments. And I know for a fact that for most of the people commenting that, their child is not going to get that result. In fact, what's going to happen is their child is just going to have a lot of debt. They're going to have a biology degree or some pre-med degree that they don't use. And then 10 years down the line, they're going to be commenting on my video saying, yes, I have this biology degree and now I'm a mortgage loan officer. And the reason is because their parents, when they were saying that, it made their parents proud, right? And who doesn't want to support their child? But they're not doing the financial calculation on how much it's going to cost, of the likelihood of success, and then on whether or not their child wants to do it. I equate it to buying a Ferrari. It's very similar because the cost at the end of the day, if you're middle, lower class, is very similar. And you wouldn't let your 17-year-old go out and buy a Ferrari that they've never driven if they don't have a driver's license and just let them go, yeah, I'm going to buy this Ferrari, and 10 years from now, or even 5.5 years from now, they can drive it and still
Mhm.
be sure that they're going to want that Ferrari. The metaphor extends even further when you think about, okay, well, would they like to have a family? Would they like to have would they like to have a pet, And then guess what doesn't fit really well in a Ferrari? 3 kids. You know what else doesn't fit really well in a Ferrari? A couple of foster dogs. And these are just things that I approach from a practical standpoint, and that for a lot of people, after the initial pressure of decide what you're going to do right out of high school, your life and the day to day of your life and the week to week of your life is going to matter a lot more than your overarching career because your life matters more than your work. So, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's
definitely. And I guess when you boil it down, and I've kind of espoused this, I guess, to my own kids. One of the things I remember saying to my wife back when our oldest sons were coming into the end of high school is that the goal I had for them was to graduate with a resume. We went about, and I guess the fortunate side of that is I'm very entrepreneurial and I always experiment. I'm always looking for the next thing, and I've done a lot of different things. So I brought a lot of my sons along for the ride and experiment, see what they're good at, et cetera. And so they had opportunities to build their resumes, their LinkedIn profiles, and then also I always said it's better to be paid to learn than to pay to learn, and getting
yes.
on the job experience. I actually heard you say that in one of your clips. I was like, wow, she read my mind. And then as far as that opportunity cost, as far as going through, it's not necessarily 4 years, but I saw you saying that the average span of that college career is 5.5 years if someone does
60%.
graduate. So you got to take into account the debt that the student takes on, the average amount of tuition and the interest on those loans and the lost wages. That's something that no one talks about, because even if a child can come out of high school and land a job at 40 or 50,000 a year and kind of work their way up over 5.5 years, that is like a plus $250,000. And you doing the math, I saw on the other side of that, that is a cost of approaching $500,000. And so that was very eye-opening to me. So with that background, what is your own college experience? Did you go to college? Did you not? And what was your personal experience with that?
Yeah, I like this question too. I get it all the time on TikTok. What's funny about it is I usually get it from, and I tend to say this in it's how I mean it, but I tend to get it from papered people, and I get it from papered people, and I say papered people because there are some people that go to college that are educated. There are some people that go to college that are papered, and papered people have a very set, very crystallized mindset, and they believe that college equals education. They don't believe anybody that doesn't purchase a college degree can be educated, which is just a fundamentally closed-minded, unacademic point of view. That's just that just can't be. That's just not an academic line of thought. It's also just not reasonable. But I get asked this question a lot, and the reason is because they're trying to tell me that I can't speak about college unless I bought a college degree, which is a logical fallacy called appeal from authority, which they should have taught them in college. But anyway, so I actually did go to I did go to college. I was dual enrolled at 16, and so I started full time actually at the local university in Savannah, Georgia, where I'm from, and I started full time there. It's now part of Georgia Southern, this college that's there. And I was the youngest paid writer they ever had for their paper, and I got through by the time I graduated high school, so I was also working full time my senior year of high school because I was fully dual enrolled, so I had a lot of time. And so I was working full time at an Irish pub there, which was a good time in life. But I was working full time and I was going to school as well. And I just remember so clearly sitting in my art class. I was sitting in an art appreciation class that I did not appreciate and just going, why am I sitting? Why am I here?
Mhm.
This is so boring. I am not learning a shred of things. It might have been too because the art professor was just talking about how great Jackson Pollock is, and I hate Jackson Pollock. I don't know what it was, but that day I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I can't sit here for one more second. It's just excruciatingly painful. And so I I was like, I'm n I that kind of set me thinking just to leave. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have an idea of what I was gonna do, because I already had a full-time job, so there was that. And I remember sitting down, it was midterms. I sat down for a sociology midterm, and I was looking at the midterm paper, and I just remember looking at it, just going, "I don't need to be here." And so I got up and I tore the midterm in half, and I threw it in the trash and I left. I stole a book from the library before I left. I've paid for it since, but that was the last thing I did. I stole a book of
Uh,
Longfellow poetry, and I think that was the most education I got out of college.
okay, perfect. Well, I think the statute of limitations is expired on that book, but it's good, that you
Yeah.
followed up with that. But that's a nice term as far as those that are papered or papered people. I do have some college, and I've probably been interviewed for jobs prior to teaching online and doing
Oh,
what I
you're
do
degree
now.
free.
Yeah, I'm degree
Oh.
free. Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
and
wow. There we go.
none of my sons, one of my sons has gone to a little bit of college, and we have a lot of sons. We have six sons, then we finally had a daughter. Okay, so yeah,
You
it's
have 7 kids?
yeah, seven kids, and yeah, so it's been, so that was part of the driving force of me trying so many different things and working multiple
Yeah.
jobs, and I was overemployed before it was cool, and because I had to, and
Have you ever
making
been
that.
in that subreddit?
Yeah, yeah. I have
It's
not
crazy, right?
contributed, but it is interesting. It reminds me of some of the stress of trying to manage multiple calendars and all that. So yeah, true confession time with Mike Wheeler. So there's probably some former employers going, "Oh, that explains it." But
That
anyway,
explains why you couldn't make that meeting.
right, exactly. But that's how I gained a lot of experience in a short amount of time as well. So there's that. But and I recently I had this moment of wondering like, well, maybe I'm And this is before I realized who you were and the whole degree free movement. I thought, maybe it wouldn't hurt to try and get a degree, and I'm one of those, from the older school and thinking, well, maybe I should do that. And I enrolled in a semester, and it was like a virtual university, Western Governors University, WGU,
Sure,
fine
sure.
program, fine school, inexpensive, manageable for the working adult, et cetera, et cetera. And I was taking this course related to the A plus certification. I joke that the A plus certification is everything that can go wrong with Windows products, but I digress. And it was just, the material was very dry and just a lot of reading, the occasional video. And I was up to the last day of the semester, and the capstone was passing the one of the two parts of the A plus certification. I was desperate. I actually bought Jason Dion's course on Udemy, one of my contemporaries, and he actually prepared me for things that were going to be in the labs that I had no idea about from that $4,000 program from WGU. So it's like $10 or $4,000. And so I didn't re-up for another semester there. So to me, that's my collegiate background. And I guess helping navigate kids of as far as graduating with a resume and entering the workforce and helping them build their profiles, et cetera. And I know this is another interesting thing I've noticed about who you are, I guess, addressing in your videos. Oftentimes you're approaching the parents rather than the young adults or the new adults. I'm trying to think of what you call them. They're not
Yeah, new
kids,
adults.
they're new adults, so I've been watching.
Well, how
But
crazy is that, right? That they call them how are colleges, even though colleges are not the majority of Americans, the majority of the US employed workforce is degree free, and yet we refer to 18 to 24-year-olds as college age adults. It's wild.
right, yeah,
It's just such good marketing,
that is great
right?
marketing. It's
They
powerful.
own an entire age bracket. It's default checkbox. It's a checkbox. They belong to them. That's a crazy thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know you're on TikTok. That tends to be more of a younger demographic. So I would think, okay, you're going to speak to those in that age group, and I don't know if it's you're backdooring the parents through the new adults. I'm still want to call them kids. I'm in
No,
my
no,
50s,
I
so
I
everyone's a
I
kid.
fight that too.
But have you thought a lot about the persona as far as the people you're trying to reach? Is it mostly parents, mostly the new adults, or what's the approach there?
So what I found, so part of the reason that I started talking more to parents and to the younger to the new adults was because I was working with degree-free people, but interestingly, or I thought I was, but the people who were filtering through who needed my help were actually people that were papered and they needed help trying to actually make their money back because they were in student debt, they were in jobs that they didn't like, situations they didn't like and they couldn't fix, and they didn't know how they had no strategic ability to figure out how to get from point A to point B without buying another college degree, which to me is just the most insane thing to do. Like if you're and it's not so much a judgment on them because this is just how we're taught, right? It's difficult to break out of this mindset if you're taught to think this way for 12 years straight and then you buy a degree and you're taught to think this way for another 5.5 years and you think every time you want to do something or make a change or learn a new skill, you have to go back and purchase a paper from a college. That's just such a crazy thing to think. But they've done a great job marketing and selling that idea to everybody because that's how they make their money. And your best customer is one that's already bought from you. So if you can sell somebody the bachelor's degree, a master's degree, then fantastic. The longer you can keep them on campus, the more likely they are to keep going because they're afraid to get out into the real world. They're afraid of what's out there and they'd rather just stay in this insulated professional student bubble. But anyway, that aside, so a lot of people what happened was I was helping them and then they started to ask questions about their kids because all of them had been burned by student debt and some of them were carrying six-figure loan balances still. And to be honest, I was looking at it's difficult because at that point too, people want to do what they want because we've all bought this whole your work has to be your passion, which I do not subscribe to. Um, your life has to be your passion, but they've all bought this and so they want to do something they love, but they also want to get paid a premium for it so that they can pay off their loans. And the really difficult conversation comes when I have to sit down and tell somebody, look, you have to find the highest leverage skill you can find because you have to pay off your debt if you want to be free of this so that you can pursue something that you just love, that you can take a loss on, that you can afford to do because you want to do it responsibly, financially, for yourself and for your kids. And so they started to ask about their kids and how they could help their kids avoid getting into the situation they were in. And so I started talking about that. And what's interesting is that got a lot more interest. We were running a community for a while, and that got a lot more interest in our community than anything else. And so that's why I started talking about it because I was like, oh, there's a lot more upside for the teenagers because they can avoid this trap. It saves them a ton of time, it saves them a ton of money, and oftentimes, as you well know, they can really find specific targeted learning courses, try those things, and the downside risk is so low because if they fail, the college is always gonna be there. The college is always gonna take their money. They're never gonna turn them they're never gonna turn them away. People think that they will, but they won't because they want their money. And, it's just one of those things that once I realized that and I started talking about that, the last couple months has been crazy on TikTok because there's obviously a lack of people speaking about it because I'm one of the only ones.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely a void in that conversation, and you're filling that space quite wisely as well. And so you're talking about helping people. I know you do a lot of calls, a lot of interviews. You've got a program coming or you're working on. Tell me about the projects and the programs and the help that you provide to those out there that may be interested.
Sure. So we're running I'll call them pilot programs right now. One of them, we actually just filled our we had 10 charitable spots open for our beta program and we filled them. So we filled them very, very quickly, which was great. So I'm working with 10 pretty amazing kids who are trying to figure out how to graduate with a resume, as you say. And anything ranging from equine massage to welding to firefighting to UX UI design. So we got a wide range. Oh, and there's an aerospace tech, and then there's a girl in there trying to start her own business, making pottery. So we got a wide range of interests, and it's really fun for me because that's my this is what I'm good at, which is I will find every possibility. I will break down every single route that they have, every single skill that they need, and then every single option to learn those skills, and then they can choose with their parents. So that's what we're calling our degree-free launch. The launch is 4 weeks long, and it's 4 calls, and basically what I do is go through their goals, like your what does your day-to-day look like? You know, what does your week to week look like? Not what do you wanna be? Because ideally, no 16 to 18-year-old knows the real answer to that question. So it's more, what do you wanna try? And what's gonna fit around the life that you'd like to live or help you live it. And then, I do vocational creativity, which is something Ryan and I have come up with. It's actually more Ryan's brainchild than mine, but, the way the exercise works is I'll give them something, like a straw. I have this metal straw, and I say, "How many jobs can you think of that have to do with this?" And that's actually a surprisingly difficult thing to do. And so we're trying to train them to use this muscle, where they think about, okay, there's people that run drop shipping stores on Amazon. There's people that design these. There's people that work on the manufacturing lines. There's people that work for the buyers and sellers. Like there's people that work at ports that receive the crates, right? We try to just help them go as far as they can down the line of everything that has to do with this straw. And the reason we do that is because that can be an effective way to find work is if there's a product that they like, they can find a job working around it. And that's kind of a fun exercise. But it's also just to discuss here are all the jobs that maybe you didn't know existed because high schools do not do a good job teaching what options there are. And the reason is just because guidance counselors and teachers are taught to teach from a college menu, and that's just the tools they've been given, and it's difficult for them to break out of that because all of them are papered. And so they just don't have very much vocational creativity because they never needed it, right? They just they saw teachers, they're like, "I'm gonna be a teacher." They went to college, and they came back into a school. And then after that, basically I build a curriculum. So I outline this is everything that you need that you need to learn if you're
For
going to
each
try to do
child,
this.
for each new adult, you do that?
Yeah, so for
That's
each new
amazing.
adult, yeah, they each get, it's pretty cool actually. So it's and I'm kind of working on part of what I'm doing in this process is formalizing this, because what I'd like to do is make this something that's accessible to more people, because right now it's just very hands-on. It's hours of my time just researching for these kids, which is such an honor and such a privilege, because it's very cool to be able to help them explore these options, and a lot of them they've never heard of, which is so much fun for me. But, let's say they have 5 options, and every one of those 5 options, I give them each skill they need, and for each skill that they need, I give them 3 options to learn it. Free, mid-tier, and then vocational or boot camp or whatever. Um, so yeah, it's a lot. And then I regroup with the parents at the end, and we all review
Right,
it.
right. Yeah, that's fascinating because, I've taken the approach of on demand and kind of infinitely scalable. And I do some live stuff, but it's group coaching. And I've occasionally done one-on-one, but that is a big commitment. And so you talk a lot about skill stack. Have you started to put together like your own skills library or think any about skill adjacency? These are the things that my wheels are turning on because I've led people down a path that now it's kind of a saturated market. And when AI is coming along and everyone has to reskill, and that's the beauty of it, is that whether you're papered or not, guess what? It's time to reskill. So,
Yep.
uh, what are you doing in that skill space, or have you found any tools, or are you creating your own? And that's from me just wanting to know, okay, what is out there? Because I've been reading more articles around human resources, HR, skill libraries, and that's something that I didn't really know about a few months ago. So, can you speak to that?
Yeah, so that is something we are working on actively. It is a massive undertaking to build what we believe needs to exist. And what's fun about it is that Ryan and I both are finding ourselves very challenged in a technical way, because I'm not a developer, and Ryan, I'll say he's a developer light. Ryan is very good at pretty much everything he touches, but uh he's kind of teaching himself where he's missing things in that skill stack. But he's was a very early adopter of ChatGPT. I would definitely call him a power user. Recently, I've seen the term prompt engineer emerge as a job, and I would argue that that's what he is, because I am dizzied by watching him interact with ChatGPT. It's too much for me. And I work in AI machine learning. I work for an AI machine learning SaaS. That's what I do now. I'm the head of operations for an AI machine learning SaaS, but I do a little bit of QA, I do some testing, I help in the technical space some, but I just don't code. I'm quickly realizing I need to learn Python just because everyone should know it, but I'm resistant,
Right,
so.
right. Yeah, I kind of forgot to ask you. I assume that the course that you took of mine was the administrator certification for
Mhm,
Salesforce. Okay.
mhm.
And so did you end up attaining certification or multiple certifications, or how did that go?
Yeah. Oh my goodness, Mike, I studied. I should show you. I don't have them laying around here. I have a stack of flashcards. It's probably at least a foot high. It's index cards. I have so many flashcards. But that's how I learned. And I sat down for 5 hours a day for 31 days. At the end of that 31 days, I did pass my exam. And within 45 days, I had a job. And
Excellent.
I was 4 days a week, 70K. It was
Wow.
and computer science degree required. Obviously not.
Not so much. Yeah. Yeah.
Not
One of
so
the things
much.
that's fascinating, and you're talking about trying to, in essence, build what you feel should exist. And I've been starting to dabble with creating custom GPTs, and that's only been out just a few days. I actually
Mhm.
was up late recording a course around that. I've got that submitted to Udemy, so hopefully that's coming out soon. A little sneak peek for everybody. That's why I'm a little bit hoarse and raspy. But I think that is a great avenue to have tools like a ChatGPT, and now to be able to build a custom GPT where you can start to train it on your own, what you hold dear, and your writings as well, so that you can start to, I guess, expand beyond your own time capacity in this new realm or this new marketplace of ideas. And with that, I know, and I've seen, and you mentioned that you're interviewing a lot of people because you're writing a book. And I'm not asking you to divulge any, insider information or anything like that, but what can you tell us about the book? As in subject matter, I could guess, but then also timeline for release, self-publish, trying to get an agent, trying to get a publisher. I'm asking for a friend, so just trying to learn. So
So that's a great question. We're hardcore self-publishers. I like it because I think it just philosophically lines up with where we are, which is do it yourself. I have seen people successful with agents. So it's definitely still an avenue, but I do think self-publishing is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger because it just lowers the barrier because now there's not people in your way. You can publish whatever you want. My other concern is that given the given the amount of times I get reported on TikTok for false information for things that are not false. I do not want someone else editing my work. I'm gonna say what I'd like to say in the way I'd like to say it. And so the biggest aspect for me is control, actually, creative control of what goes in the book. And I realize that their job is to figure out what's gonna sell, but I don't care. I'm gonna say what I'd like to say. And so that's the biggest thing for me. But also what's so the book is targeted towards parents to help them walk through what we've come up with the 5 degree free pathways, which is get a job, find apprenticeship or on the job training, earn a license or certification like Salesforce, and then build a business or learn a skill. And so we kind of walk them through how to have those conversations with their kids because the earlier they start those, the easier it's going to be for their children and the more the broader of a vision their kids are going to be able to have about what direction they'd like to go and how to get there. And so we're just trying to equip parents with what can I do? Because I recently read this survey. I gotta find it, but it was so interesting. I was reading this survey about how a lot of parents they don't want to sit there. They don't. The majority of parents actually do not want to send their kids to a 4-year college, but they don't know what to do otherwise. And it was overwhelming in the survey was all the parents were just saying they were not given they had no idea where to look. They didn't know where to look. So there's a giant hole in the market where they just need a framework that's accessible to them that they can talk through with their kids that they can use. And so that's what I was doing. I had hundreds of calls with parents. I opened up my I opened up my calendar. Sometimes I do this and I do it and I don't know what's going to happen. And I was like, "Oh, I'll just open it up after work for a week and see what happens." And in 15-minute blocks, and immediately I had hundreds. I was like, "Oh my gosh, what have I done?" I was like back-to-back calls for 7, 8 hours, for like 7, 8 calls after work until like 9 o'clock at night. It's great though, because I seriously doubt that that many anyone has had one-on-one conversations with that many parents about their concerns of their for their kids that are that age. And so it was really I learned a lot. It was very cool. And so I'm writing about that, but also uh, Ryan and Ryan, like I said, very smart man, and he was reading through the American Survey of Consumer Finance, and you have probably heard the $1 million earnings myth, and that is from a 2012 Georgetown study. So great resource. 2012 Georgetown study that said that college graduates earn $1 million more over their lifetime. There's a couple reasons why that's bullshit. But first of all, there's a reason we don't use average for salary information. There's a reason that we use median if we want to be accurate. And there's a reason that they included doctors, lawyers, and other graduates in that average. That's because if you pull them out and you do the math again, it doesn't look nearly that bright. And not only that, but that number is based on household income,
oh, okay,
which would skew
interesting.
the numbers quite a lot.
That helps a lot, especially as many kids as I have. But anyway,
It does. They're looking at the household income earners. So if you have a husband and a wife, let's just say, and the wife has a master's degree and she's unemployed for whatever reason, and the husband is a self-taught software developer, the income of that house is attributed to the wife,
hmm.
which is to me I will attribute it to dirty data, but I do not think it's dirty data. I think it's fraud. And so we are currently essentially the finding examples and creating visual aids to publish a white paper to say essentially to say that, because uncovering that and realizing that was one of the biggest thunderclaps for Ryan and I, because we just went, "Oh my gosh, that's what they're doing." And the reason this matters too, Mike, is because there's an entire market that's built around these student loans. I don't know if you knew that. They're called bricks. It's very similar if you've ever seen The Big Short, where they talk about the
Mhm.
tranches and they talk about the housing market and how they were betting on mortgages. It's the same thing. It's literally the same, and they're doing the same thing, which is they're repackaging them, and they are saying these are AAA rated, and they're good, and there's a billion-dollar stock market that's built on top of these student loans, and it's a really big deal, and unsurprisingly, there's a lot of incentive to say that the loans and the people holding the loans are gonna make more money than they're actually gonna make, and so I think once we get this published, I do think that that's gonna be a very interesting I think we're gonna be very busy in the media
Yeah,
the next
that
few months.
that story, I mean, I'm just thinking this is going to be a movie. So you guys need to get an agent, just for right, self-publish your book, but the stories that you're getting ready to tell, I just see you and your husband poised to really rock a lot of institutions, which is really fascinating to me. So I guess the kind of final question, and I'll keep it to that because I don't want to be, oh, one more thing is curious what your thoughts are, and you've probably been asked this many times, your thoughts on the college admission scandal, the parents that bought their way into the elite schools, the
Uh-huh.
celebrities, and kind of a scandal that broke a few years ago to where there were a lot of powerful people and celebrities that were funneling their kids into these elite schools and paying top dollar to this recruiter basically that had ends with athletic departments basically, so they were
Mhm.
portraying kids as polo players or
Rowers or
rowers, and they weren't. And they
yes.
were photoshopping their images and stuff. And some people, some very powerful people, went to jail for a short while. So I didn't know if you had looked into that or if you had any takeaways from that as far as what that exposes about the system.
I do, and I think my take on it is it probably won't surprise you, but I don't know, it's one that maybe other people have heard, but what that said to me, because in order to commit that kind of crime, I'm also not so much a fan of things that there's really no victims, of the crime necessarily. I think calling that a crime is a pretty strong word, but, at the same time, I saw that happen, and all I saw of that was that it meant that that system has been there, the unofficial system, the one that was allowing them to do that existed before. They didn't make that out of nowhere. They've been doing that for years, probably. They've been doing that for decades, I'd imagine. And what that told me was, 1, the this system, this unofficial system was there and it existed for them to pay into at all. And that to me, I feel like the parents are not the ones that should have gone to jail for that. I feel like it should have been the people who were taking their money from the college because they were the ones that took the money. They were the ones that took the bribe. And the parents just offered the money, but the administrators were the ones that took it. And that to me is, that's kinda how I feel about that, but I thought it was interesting that they chose to prosecute the parents, but they chose to prosecute the parents because the parents had money and they were famous, and it made it look like they were doing some kind of justice, but in reality, the school absolutely knew that was going on, absolutely facilitated it, and absolutely had an unofficial system that existed that allowed that to happen.
Right. Yeah. It's fascinating. It kind of exposes that it's the old and tried and true saying, follow the money,
Mhm.
and that's kind of where that all shook out. So, yeah, fascinating talk. Thank you so much, Hannah. And where can people find you online? I'm sure they can find you, but just in case, website, TikTok, whatever you're wanting to share with the crowd as we part ways.
Yeah, sure. So degreefree.co is our website. That'll have our podcast and then our application for our launch program, which I forgot to mention too. So we have our month-long program and then we have our pilot for career in a year. Where basically I'm on call for a year to help with interview prep, applications, job interviews, resume writing, and on all of that stuff. So that's something that we're doing too. That's typically more towards a little bit older older new adults who are actually able to apply for W-2 jobs. But those are the 2 things that we're doing, and that's degreefree.co/launch if you wanna apply for that, and then at degree free if you want on TikTok, if you wanna see the controversy, and then our podcast is wherever your podcasts are sold, Spotify, YouTube, the works.
Excellent. Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much, Hannah. Really enjoyed this and keep doing what you're doing. You're doing amazing work and just glad that I helped open a door and you're busting through and you're teaching me a lot. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mike. This is so cool to be on with you.
All right. Awesome.